As the world plunges into a whirlwind of crises, uncertainties, and religious illusions, a silent truth resists the tide. Governments fall, systems become corrupt, and even churches lose their way, adapting faith to the tastes of modern culture. But there is one church that does not bow down. A church that, wherever it goes, provokes intense reactions. Harsh criticism. Constant accusations. Contempt. And, for some, pure and declared hatred. It is called a sect. It is ridiculed on social media. It is ignored by the media and misunderstood even by other Christians. But why so much discomfort? What does this church carry that so many want to silence? Is it just a doctrinal difference? Or is there something deeply prophetic that its enemies refuse to admit? Today, we are going to reveal what many try to hide. And perhaps, you will never look at the Seventh-day Adventist Church the same way again. The church that did not come about by chance. Many like to say that the Adventist Church is just one among many denominations. But what really bothers them is that it was not born out of human will. It did not arise out of convenience. Nor was it the result of religious division. It arose at the right time, based on prophecy, and with a mission that no other church has fully assumed. Revelation 10 verses 8 to 11 describes exactly this emergence. A sweet and bitter message, followed by a divine command: it is important that you prophesy again. In other words, God raised up a people to restore forgotten truths and prepare the world for the final judgment. The Adventist Church is not an accident of history. It is a prophetic response to the spiritual silence of the Christian world. And that is why it is so disturbing. Because its existence exposes what many try to hide. The most disturbing sign, the Sabbath. Among all the teachings of the Adventist Church, one causes the greatest discomfort to its critics: the Sabbath. In a world that accepts Sunday as the cultural norm, the insistence on keeping the seventh-day Sabbath is seen as a direct challenge to established traditions, religious, social, and even political. The fourth commandment, in Exodus 20 verses 8 to 11, is clear. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. This commandment is the only one that begins with remember, because it is the perpetual sign of the covenant between God and his people. Jesus, in Matthew 5 verses 17 to 19, reaffirmed that he did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. This includes the Sabbath. The Sabbath is not just a day of rest, it is a visible sign of faithfulness to God. And that is precisely why it bothers them, because it exposes the superficiality of many people's faith and confronts the system that wants people to be always busy, productive, with no time for God. The enemies of the SDA Church refuse to admit that the Sabbath is much more than a ritual, it is a mark of spiritual commitment. The prophetic voice they cannot stand. In addition to the Sabbath, there is another thorn in the side of the enemies of the Adventist Church, the figure of Ellen White. She did not found the church, but she was the instrument through which God brought clarity, direction, and warning in times of spiritual confusion. Her writings anticipated, with impressive accuracy, themes that are evident today: health care, education, scientific advances, attacks on the church, and the end times. In Revelation 12 verse 17, the remnant is described as those who keep God's commandments and have the testimony of Jesus, which, according to Revelation 19 verse 10, is the spirit of prophecy. This confirms that the prophetic gift is an essential part of the end-time church. But Ellen White's prophetic voice is often discredited, ridiculed, and opposed, not because it is unfounded, but because it exposes errors and calls for repentance. The enemies of the Adventist Church refuse to admit that it has a true prophetic instrument. And it is this voice that keeps the church steadfast in the face of spiritual storms and attacks from the world. A church that exalts God's law. In the current scenario, where many Christians preach only grace, the Adventist Church stands out for remembering a fundamental truth: grace does not nullify God's law. God's law, given by Him Himself, is eternal, holy, and just. Revelation 14 verse 12 describes the faithful people of the end times as those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. This faithfulness to the commandments is not a burden, but an expression of love and genuine commitment to the Creator. In a world that rejects divine standards and prefers to adapt faith to its own desires, this causes discomfort. The SDA Church challenges the culture of relativism, affirming that obedience is an inseparable part of true faith. And it is because of this steadfastness that it is attacked, discredited, and misunderstood. The truth about judgment. One of the doctrines that most differentiates the Adventist Church is the teaching of the investigative judgment. While many churches ignore or reject this truth, Adventists believe that since 1844, Christ has initiated a heavenly judgment, examining each person's life to reveal who will be ready for his return. In Daniel 8 verse 14, the prophecy speaks of the 2,300 days after which the sanctuary would be cleansed, a reference to the judgment in the heavenly sanctuary. Hebrews 8 verse 1 and 2 confirm that Jesus ministers in this true sanctuary in heaven. This doctrine shows that judgment is not a distant future event, but an ongoing process. It is a message of responsibility and hope, for it shows that God knows every detail of our lives and has a plan to purify His people. However, many reject this truth because it confronts the idea of a superficial or non-existent judgment. And that is why this doctrine is opposed and misinterpreted. World mission that challenges the system. The Adventist Church is not a local or isolated church. Its work transcends borders, impacting the world in more than 200 countries. With a global network that includes more than 220 hospitals, thousands of schools and universities, and social projects that bring humanitarian aid to those most in need, the SDA Church is not limited to words, it takes action. This impressive reach, which transforms lives in forgotten communities, is often ignored or minimized by its critics. They refuse to recognize that the Adventist Church is a living force that challenges the current religious and social system. And it is precisely this global and concrete impact that bothers them. Because showing an active faith, committed to truth and service, dismantles false narratives and exposes the deception of spiritual relativism. A church that denounces the deceptions of the end. The Adventist Church does not remain silent in the face of the false teachings that proliferate in the end times. It denounces empty spiritualism, ecumenism that seeks unification without truth, the false doctrine of the immortality of the soul, and the myth of the secret rapture. These deceptions are pillars of the modern religious system, used to deceive and accommodate people, diverting them from biblical truth. Revelation 14 verses 6 to 10 presents the threefold angelic message, an urgent call to worship God in truth, reject the beast and its marks, and avoid eternal condemnation. These messages provoke opposition because they directly attack the heart of worldly religions and human philosophies. The enemies of the Adventist Church refuse to admit that it is a prophetic voice crying in the wilderness, warning the world of impending spiritual dangers. Persecution is prophesied. It is no surprise that the Adventist Church faces rejection, attacks, and persecution. Jesus himself warned. John 15 verses 18 to 20, "If the world hates you, know that it hated me first." And the book of Revelation reveals that the faithful will be persecuted for refusing to accept the mark of the beast, remaining steadfast in the truth. Revelation 13 verses 15 to 17 shows how those who keep the commandments and have the testimony of Jesus will be the target of hatred and censure. Opposition and suffering are signs that the church is on the right path, fulfilling its divine mission. Prophecy does not promise an easy path, but it assures us that God will be with His people until the end. This certainly strengthens the faithful to resist, knowing that true victory comes from the Lord. The truth is this. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is not perfect, no one is. But it is prophetic. It is raised up by God to fulfill an essential role in this time of crisis and deception. Its teachings, its mission, and its faithfulness to the Word expose what many want to hide. And that is precisely why its enemies refuse to admit its truth. 2 Corinthians 13 verse 8 reminds us. For we can do nothing against the truth, but for the truth. Today, the decision is yours. Ignore the messages, close your eyes to the evidence, or sincerely seek to know the truth that many try to hide. Time is short, and the choice will be eternal. May God grant you the courage to seek, discern, and remain faithful, even when the majority refuses the truth. If this message touched your heart, be sure to like it and subscribe to the channel to strengthen the truth. Share this video so that more people can learn what many try to hide. And write your opinion, questions, or experiences here in the comments. I want to hear from you. Remember, together, we can walk in the light of truth, prepared for what is to come. May God bless you and your family.